So that's the Uber perspective. We're very happy to have in the studio the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission, attorney for the MTC, Neil Bruntrager. Neil, why doesn't the MTC want Uber in St. Louis?
The MTC does want Uber in St. Louis, but we also want public safety, and those things have to go hand in hand. Uber is more than welcome to come here. We've tried to set it up for them to come here. We've made it as simple as we can make it for them. They simply don't want any regulation. We have a duty under the law to make sure that the vehicles for hire that operate in this area operate in a manner that protects the public. And that's all we're saying. We've got three really simple conditions that, by the way, we are seeing them employ in New York City, and we're seeing them employ in Houston. So again, it's simple. If Uber wants to come to St. Louis, it's up to Uber. We've made it as simple as we can make it.
I think they would disagree that it's as simple as possible, but they at the very least, they don't like some of the terms, right. The least of which, not the least of which, is the background checking, the fingerprinting, things of that nature. They do their background checks. We just heard it. They also they claim more insurance than you require. Why isn't that good enough?
Well, let's talk about background checks first, because biometric checks are what we're talking about in terms of what we're doing. We're talking about fingerprint checks. Their checks are, you give them your name, you give them your birth date, you give them your social security number, and they use a private vendor who goes out and searches just as anyone could on the internet. They tell us that they go to courthouses and that sort of thing, but under Missouri law, there are records that they can never get, that are closed records, that they are prevented by law from getting.
That you can get?
That I can absolutely get through the FBI and through the Missouri Highway Patrol. And we are mandated to get, by the way. So let's remember that these ideas of background checks where I'm arguing this, I'm not saying this because I think it's a good idea. I'm saying it because state statute says we must do that. Now, let's talk about these
You're not being too picky on the background check there for a person who just wants to drive me from point A to point B.
No, we can't be. I mean, it's not a situation where we are, in our discretion, are saying, let's do background checks in some instances. We have to in every vehicle for hire. It's mandated in the statutes that create the Taxi Cab Commission. Now, they want to compare us to the rest of the world. Not the rest of the world has statutes like we do. We must enforce those statutes. But let's talk about what a background check looks like, okay? I go in and I give you my fingerprints. That gets sent to the Highway Patrol and it gets sent to the FBI. If there is a closed record under Missouri law, and you can look it up, it's in the Sunshine Law, Chapter 610, talks about what's a closed record. A first offense, most of those end up in what we call a suspended imposition of sentence.
First offense of?
Anything. But usually, let's talk about something relevant to a driver, a DWI. Most first offense DWIs end up with a suspended imposition of sentence. Once that probation has been completed, that record is closed by law. The only person that can access that record is a law enforcement agency, period, end of story. I don't care what Uber says, there is no way they can legally get into those records. And what could be more useful when deciding whether or not a person should drive or not? They can't get those records.
Moving on from the records for 1 second, you said you're making it as simple as possible, but clearly the public perception in St. Louis is that the MTC is a bunch of Luddites who just can't get with it in 2015.
Yeah.
Are you behind the times? Or do you need to be more flexible? Do you need to look at this new way of getting from point A to point B?
We can't be flexible in terms of what the statutes mandate that we do. These aren't our rules. These are rules that are made by the state legislature. So if people don't like those are rules that get changed in Jefferson City, not in St. Louis. In terms of moving people from point A to point B, we make every effort to make that as easy as we can. Frankly, the technology that they're talking about, that's available in any number of forms right now for St. Louis taxi cabs. They can use that right now, right here. So again, what we're losing is the PR game. But the fact of the matter is, we are more than open to these ideas. There's nothing that we're trying to do in terms of preventing technology from coming here. But it's not about technology. It's about public safety.
Is it not about jobs? I've got to believe that you would be worried about taxi driver jobs.
Well, here, yes, it is about jobs. And if you compare the jobs that Uber claims they're going to create to the jobs that we know exist right now, I think there's no comparison. All right, now again, keep in mind, this whole idea of jobs and what's an employee and what's not is going to be a big issue as Uber comes in. There's just been a ruling in California that says that the Uber
parts of the country.
Right, that the Uber drivers are not independent contractors, they are in fact employees. Well, if you're an employee, you got to pay taxes on these guys, you got to give them benefits, there are all sorts of things that apply. Again, that could come here and that could be a big issue here. We want jobs, but we want sustainable jobs. The taxi industry employs people, and many, many people, who make all of their income in taxis. So again, Are you going to take jobs to give jobs? It's a balance that you have to think about. You can't ignore.
But somehow Columbia, Missouri has figured this out. Kansas City, Missouri has figured this out. And St. Charles County, the Metro East have figured this out.
But they don't have the same statutory structure that we have. So again, in our statutory structure, we have rules that say we have to make sure that we regulate vehicles for hire. And that's what we try and do. And it's a balance. It's unfair to say, you know what, Uber, we're going to let your people come in and you're going to operate as a taxi cab. And I don't care what you say, it's a taxi. Whether you call it a taxi or not, it still operates as a taxi. And when Lyft came in last summer, and we successfully stopped Lyft last summer, Lyft came in and said, we're a ride-sharing company, we're not taxis. Court ruled on all that. Court said, you are, in fact, a taxi company. You perform all the duties that a taxi company performs. So let's not get too far away from that. So again, you can compare us to these other places, but they don't have the same statutory structure that we have, and we simply can't ignore that. We must enforce that structure.
Neil Bruntrager, thank you for the insight from that perspective from the MTC. This is another perspective we have to have in this conversation is social media. This is one that brought this topic to our attention, and one that we had a lot of feedback and a lot of discussion on earlier this week online. Let's take a look.